The morning of May 6, 2023, began unlike any other for the Wales family. Inside their Kensington Palace residence, the household was buzzing with an energy that could only come from preparing for one of the most historic events in modern British history. The children had been awake since dawn, their excitement making it impossible to sleep any longer. 9-year-old Prince George understood the weight of the day ahead, his role as a page of honor sitting heavy on his young shoulders. His sister, Princess Charlotte, aged 8, moved through the morning with a grace beyond her years, while 5-year-old Prince Louis simply couldn't contain his enthusiasm. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had been planning this day for months. Every detail mattered, from the children's attire to their behavior during the lengthy ceremony. She knew the world would be watching, analyzing every moment, every gesture, but more importantly, this was her father-in-law's coronation, a moment when King Charles III would officially take his place as monarch. The weight of tradition and the promise of a new era hung in the air like morning mist over the Thames. William stood before the mirror, adjusting his ceremonial robes. The Knight of the Garter mantle felt familiar yet somehow different today. This wasn't just another royal engagement or state occasion. This was the moment his father would be crowned, and he would formally become the heir apparent in the eyes of the nation and the Commonwealth. His mind wandered briefly to his own children, wondering how George felt about his special role in the ceremony. The young prince would be one of 8 pages of honor, and William remembered his own nervousness at similar ages during royal events. The stylist worked carefully on Catherine's hair, creating an elegant updo that would support the headpiece she had chosen for the occasion. The Alexander McQueen gown hung nearby, its ivory silk crepe and silver bullion embroidery catching the morning light. Catherine had chosen British designer Sarah Burton specifically to honor the nation's craftsmanship. Every element of her outfit carried meaning, from the floral motifs representing the 4 nations of the United Kingdom, to the choice of colors that would photograph beautifully, yet remain respectful and understated. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her own Alexander McQueen creation. The young princess had inherited her mother's sense of style and natural poise. She twirled once, the white dress with silver detailing moving gracefully around her. Catherine smiled, reaching out to adjust a small detail on her daughter's collar. The moment was tender, a brief pause in the orchestrated chaos of the morning. These were the memories Catherine wanted her children to carry forward, not just the pomp and circumstance, but the family moments woven between historic events. George emerged from his room, the crimson and gold page of honor uniform, transforming him from child to participant in centuries of tradition. William felt a surge of pride mixed with protectiveness. His son looked so grown up, yet still so young. They had practiced the ceremony multiple times, but there was no rehearsal for the actual weight of walking in procession behind a newly crowned king. George caught his father's eye and managed a nervous smile. William gave him an encouraging nod, remembering how his own father had steadied him during important moments. Louis bounded down the hallway, his energy completely at odds with the formal morning suit he wore. At 5 years old, he understood that today was special, but the full magnitude escaped him. For Louis, this was an adventure, a chance to ride in a fancy car and see Grandpa in his crown. Catherine caught him mid-bounce, kneeling down to his level. She spoke softly, reminding him about the behavior expected during the long ceremony. Louis nodded seriously, though his eyes still sparkled with barely contained excitement. The family gathered in the main drawing room for a final check before departure. The official photographer captured a few precious moments, the 5 of them together before entering the public eye. Catherine adjusted William's robes one last time, a wifely gesture that felt grounding amid all the formality. These small touches of normalcy kept them connected to who they were beyond their titles and duties. They were a family first, royal second, though the world often saw it the other way around. As they prepared to leave, Catherine took a moment to look at her 3 children. George standing tall despite his nerves, Charlotte serene and composed, Louis vibrating with anticipation. Each of them represented a different facet of this extraordinary life they led. She felt the familiar mixture of pride and fierce protectiveness that defined her motherhood. Today they would step into history, but she would make sure they remained grounded in love and family values. The convoy of vehicles waited outside, their route to Westminster Abbey carefully planned and secured. William helped George into their car, while Catherine settled between Charlotte and Louis. The streets of London were already lined with people, thousands having camped overnight for a glimpse of the procession. Through the tinted windows, the Wales family could see the Union flags waving, the excitement palpable even from within their protected bubble. This was what it meant to be part of the monarchy in the modern age, balancing accessibility with security, tradition with relatability. As they drove through the historic streets toward Westminster Abbey, Catherine looked at each of her children in turn. Whatever happened today, whatever challenges the ceremony might bring, they would face it together as a family. The crowds cheered as their car passed, catching glimpses of the young royals inside. Charlotte waved gracefully, already understanding the unspoken contract between the royal family and the public. George sat quietly, mentally preparing for his role. Louis pressed his face against the window, drinking in every sight and sound of this remarkable day. Westminster Abbey stood before them like a monument to 1,000 years of British history. The Gothic architecture reached toward the cloudy London sky, its towers and spires familiar yet somehow more imposing today. Catherine felt her breath catch slightly as their car pulled up to the entrance. This building had witnessed coronations since 1066, and today it would add another chapter to its remarkable story. She glanced at William, seeing the mix of emotions playing across his face. This was his father's day, but it was also a glimpse into their own future. George stepped out of the vehicle first, his page of honor uniform drawing immediate attention from the gathered press. The cameras clicked furiously, capturing every moment of the young prince's arrival. He stood straighter, aware of the eyes upon him, remembering everything his parents had taught him about duty and service. Behind him, Charlotte emerged with natural elegance, her white dress perfect against the gray stone of the abbey. She reached back to help Louis, who was momentarily overwhelmed by the noise and spectacle around them. Inside the abbey, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. 2,000 guests filled the pews, representing nations from across the Commonwealth and beyond. Heads of state, foreign royalty, celebrities, and charity representatives all waited for the ceremony to begin. The abbey had been decorated with thousands of flowers, their scent mixing with the ancient smell of stone and history. Tapestries hung from the walls, and the coronation chair used since 1308 sat ready near the altar. Every detail had been planned to perfection, blending centuries-old tradition with modern touches. Catherine and William made their way to their seats in the front rows, the children following closely. George would need to leave soon to take his place with the other pages of honor, but for now they sat together as a family. Catherine reached over and squeezed George's hand, a silent message of support and love. She could feel his nervousness through that small touch, but also his determination to do his duty well. This was what they were preparing him for. These moments when personal feelings had to be balanced with public responsibility. The abbey's organ began to play, its deep notes reverberating through the ancient space. The ceremony was beginning. George rose from his seat, giving his mother one last look before moving to join the other pages. Catherine watched him go, her heart in her throat. He looked so small among the other boys, yet he walked with purpose and dignity. William placed his hand on her knee, a gesture of understanding. They were both feeling the same mixture of pride and protectiveness that came with watching their children step into the spotlight. Charlotte sat perfectly still between her parents, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She watched everything with wide eyes, taking in the grandeur of the occasion. Unlike Louis, who fidgeted beside his mother, Charlotte seemed to understand the solemnity of the moment. She had asked her mother many questions in the days leading up to the coronation, wanting to understand what would happen and why. Catherine had been impressed by her daughter's thoughtful questions and her genuine interest in understanding royal tradition. Louis, despite his mother's earlier reminders, found it increasingly difficult to sit still. The ceremony was long, and 5-year-old attention spans were not built for such occasions. He wiggled in his seat, earning a gentle but firm hand from his mother. William leaned down, whispering something in his youngest son's ear that brought a small giggle quickly suppressed. They had known this would be challenging for Louis, but they also felt it was important for all 3 children to be present for this historic moment. The processional began, and all eyes turned to the back of the abbey. George stood ready with the other pages of honor, their young faces serious with concentration. As the procession moved forward, George walked with careful steps, his hand on the train of one of the royal robes. Catherine's eyes never left her son. Every step he took was steady, every movement precise. She could see the concentration on his face, the way he focused completely on his task. William felt his chest tighten with emotion. His son was performing beautifully, rising to the occasion in a way that made him incredibly proud. The ceremony unfolded with majestic precision. The Archbishop of Canterbury led the service, his voice carrying through the abbey as he spoke the ancient words of the coronation ritual. King Charles took his oath, promising to serve the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. The moment was profound, a transfer of responsibility that had been replicated for centuries. William watched his father, seeing both the man he knew and the monarch he was becoming. The weight of the crown was literal and metaphorical, and William understood better than most what his father was accepting. Charlotte leaned slightly toward her mother, whispering a question about what was happening. Catherine bent her head, explaining quietly the significance of each part of the ceremony. She wanted her children to understand that this was not just pageantry, but a sacred commitment to service. The anointing, hidden from view by screens, was particularly meaningful. This was the most religious part of the ceremony, the moment when the temporal and spiritual joined in the person of the monarch. When the St. Edward's crown was placed on King Charles's head, the abbey erupted in a controlled celebration. Trumpets sounded, and the congregation called out the traditional homage. William felt the moment deeply. His father was now king in every sense, crowned and anointed. The little boy who had once sat on his grandfather's knee at another coronation was now himself a king. Time moved in strange ways in moments like these, compressing decades into a single instant of recognition. George had completed his duties flawlessly and returned to his seat beside his father. William put his arm around his son's shoulders, pulling him close for a brief moment. No words were needed. George's relief was evident, but so was his satisfaction at having done well. Charlotte reached across her father to pat her brother's arm, a gesture of sibling pride that touched Catherine deeply. Even Louis seemed momentarily subdued by the weight of what they had just witnessed. As the ceremony continued with the crowning of Queen Camilla and the various acts of homage, the Wales family sat together, united in this moment of family and national history. They were witnesses to and participants in something that would be written about for generations. But more than that, they were a family, supporting each other through the challenges and joys of their unique life. The world saw the titles in the ceremony, but in that pew they were simply William, Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis, holding on to each other as history unfolded around them. The moment the crown touched King Charles's head, something shifted in the abbey. It was subtle, felt rather than seen, but everyone present sensed it. This was no longer a ceremony in progress, but a completed transformation. The man who had waited longer than any heir in British history had finally become king in the fullest sense. Catherine watched William's face, seeing the complexity of emotions there. Pride, certainly, but also a recognition of what this meant for their own family's future. One day William would sit where his father sat now, and George would stand where William stood today. Louis tugged at his mother's hand, confused by something he had seen. Catherine leaned down, her face close to his, explaining in simple words what was happening. Louis's questions were innocent and direct, as only a 5-year-old's could be. Why did Grandpa need a crown? How heavy was it? Could he try it on later? Catherine suppressed a smile, answering each question with patience while keeping one eye on the ceremony. These were the moments that reminded her that despite the grandeur surrounding them, they were still just a family trying to help their children understand their unique world. George sat rigidly in his seat, exhausted from the concentration required for his role but unable to relax yet. The ceremony was far from over, and he knew there would be more processions, more moments when the cameras would find him. Catherine noticed his tension and reached past Charlotte to rest her hand briefly on his knee. The touch was grounding, a reminder that his parents were there, that he had done well, that he could breathe. George's shoulders dropped slightly, some of the tension releasing. Charlotte, meanwhile, was absorbed in every detail of Queen Camilla's crowning. She watched as the Queen Consort's crown was placed upon her head, noting the jewels that caught the light from the abbey's windows. Charlotte had always been fascinated by the history and symbolism of royal regalia. She had spent hours before the coronation reading about the various crowns and their meanings. Now seeing them in person, used in their intended context, was bringing all that knowledge to life. She filed away every detail, knowing she would want to remember this forever. The homage that followed was deeply moving. Watching the various representatives come forward to pledge their loyalty to the newly crowned king gave the ceremony a personal dimension that transcended the ritual. These were real people, representing millions of others, binding themselves to the service and leadership of the new monarch. William participated in the Prince of Wales's homage, his voice steady and clear as he spoke the ancient words. It was both a public declaration and a private moment between father and son, witnessed by the world yet somehow intimate. Catherine's eyes misted slightly as she watched her husband kneel before his father. The symbolism was powerful, the future king showing respect and loyalty to the present one. But beyond the symbolism, she saw two men she loved connected by blood and duty, emotion and responsibility. When William rose and kissed his father's cheek, the gesture was both formal and deeply personal. King Charles's brief smile, quickly controlled but genuine, showed the father beneath the monarch's robes. The music swelled throughout the abbey, the choir's voices rising to the vaulted ceiling. The hymns chosen for the ceremony reflected both tradition and King Charles's personal faith. The young princes and princess sang along to the familiar tunes, their clear voices joining with those around them. Music had always been important in the Wales household, and this shared experience of singing together, even in such a formal setting, created a moment of connection. They were part of something larger than themselves, their voices blending with hundreds of others in praise and celebration. As the ceremony moved toward its conclusion, Louis's behavior became increasingly challenging. He had been remarkably patient for a child his age, but the long service was testing even his best intentions. He swung his legs, played with the order of service booklet, and at one point covered his face with his hands in what appeared to be either boredom or overwhelm. Catherine and William tag-teamed managing him, one always ready to redirect or soothe while the other focused on the ceremony. It was a delicate balance, managing a lively 5-year-old while maintaining the dignity expected of their position. Charlotte, ever the responsible older sister, tried to help with Louis. She shared her booklet with him, pointing out pictures and whispering explanations. Her maturity in the moment was remarkable, showing both her natural disposition and the careful preparation her parents had invested in helping her understand her role. Catherine caught Charlotte's eye and gave her a small, proud smile. Her daughter was rising to the occasion beautifully, showing grace under pressure that many adults would struggle to maintain. George, having completed his official duties, allowed himself to relax slightly. He was still aware of the cameras, still conscious of proper behavior, but the worst pressure had passed. He had fulfilled his role as page of honor without error, and that accomplishment gave him confidence. He sat a little taller, looked around the abbey with more curiosity, took in details he had been too nervous to notice earlier. This was his grandfather's coronation, but it was also his own introduction to the kind of ceremonial duties that would increasingly be part of his life. The final prayers and blessings carried a weight of finality. The ceremony that had taken years to plan and hours to execute was drawing to a close. King Charles and Queen Camilla stood crowned, the weight of their new responsibilities visible in their bearing. The congregation prepared for the recessional, the moment when the newly crowned monarchs would process out of the abbey and into their new reign. The Wales family gathered themselves, straightening clothing, ensuring the children were ready for the next phase of this historic day. As the organ began the triumphant music for the recessional, the atmosphere in the abbey shifted from solemn ritual to joyful celebration. The king and queen began their slow walk down the aisle, crowned and carrying the symbols of their office. Behind them came the royal family, including William, Catherine, and their children. This was the moment the world had been waiting for, the first sight of the newly crowned monarchs leaving the abbey as king and queen. The cameras flashed, capturing every angle, every expression, every moment of this historic procession. The Wales family walked with dignity, aware of their role in this moment, aware that the images being captured would be studied and shared for generations to come. Stepping out of Westminster Abbey into the spring air felt like emerging from another world. The noise of the crowd hit them immediately, a wall of sound that was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Thousands of people lined the streets, their cheers and applause echoing off the buildings. Union flags waved in a sea of red, white, and blue, while people held up phones and cameras, desperate to capture even a glimpse of the royal family. This was the public face of the coronation, the moment when the ceremony inside the abbey connected with the celebration outside. The gold state coach waited for the newly crowned king and queen, its gilded magnificence gleaming in the daylight. Built in 1762, the coach had carried monarchs to their coronations for over 2 centuries. Its Baroque styling and ornate decorations represented the continuity of the monarchy, a physical link between past and present. King Charles and Queen Camilla climbed inside, their crowns still on their heads, settling into the historic vehicle for the journey back to Buckingham Palace. The sight of them through the coach windows, crowned and waving, sent fresh waves of cheers through the crowd. William and Catherine, with their children, made their way to their own vehicle. The procession would be long, winding through the streets of London so that as many people as possible could participate in the celebration. George looked exhausted but exhilarated, the adrenaline of the day still coursing through him. Charlotte held her mother's hand tightly, her eyes wide as she took in the massive crowds. Louis, finally released from the constraints of proper abbey behavior, bounced with renewed energy, waving enthusiastically at everyone he saw. The procession began its slow journey through London. The route had been carefully planned to maximize public engagement while maintaining security. Military bands played stirring marches, their music adding to the festive atmosphere. Soldiers in ceremonial dress lined the route, their precision and discipline a testament to the military tradition that was so much a part of these occasions. Overhead, the Royal Air Force prepared for a fly-past that would conclude the day's public celebrations. Inside their car, the Wales family experienced a moment of relative privacy, despite being surrounded by thousands. Catherine helped Louis wave properly to the crowds, while William pointed out landmarks to George and Charlotte. The children had traveled these streets countless times, but never like this, never as central participants in a national celebration. Everything looked different today, transformed by the significance of the occasion and the energy of the celebrating crowds. Louis pressed his face against the window, his breath fogging the glass as he tried to see everything at once. The crowds delighted him, especially the children who had been given flags to wave. He waved back enthusiastically, his young face beaming with joy. For Louis, this was the best part of the day. Better than sitting still in the abbey, better than the formal photographs. This was fun, pure and simple, and his happiness was infectious. Even George, tired as he was, found himself smiling at his younger brother's enthusiasm. Charlotte, sitting beside her mother, maintained her composure even as she absorbed every detail of the scene outside. She noticed the diversity of the crowd, people of all ages and backgrounds united in celebration. She saw the carefully constructed viewing stands, the people who had camped overnight to secure good positions, the children perched on their parents' shoulders for a better view. Her young mind was processing it all, understanding in her own way what it meant to be part of this institution that could bring so many people together. The journey back to Buckingham Palace took far longer than a normal drive would have required. The procession moved at a ceremonial pace, ensuring maximum visibility for the crowds. William found himself reflecting on his own memories of his grandparents' coronation processions, events he had been too young to remember directly, but had seen in countless photographs and films. Now his children were creating their own memories, building their own understanding of what it meant to be part of the royal family. The weight of that responsibility never felt heavier than in moments like these. Catherine noticed George stifling a yawn and smiled sympathetically. Her eldest son had been under tremendous pressure today, and he had handled it with remarkable maturity. She made a mental note to ensure he got some rest before the balcony appearance, which would be the final public moment of the day. She knew from experience how draining these events could be, how the combination of emotional intensity and physical stamina required could leave even adults exhausted. For a 9-year-old, no matter how well prepared, it was a monumental undertaking. As they drew closer to Buckingham Palace, the crowds became even more dense. The area around the palace was packed with people, all hoping for the best view of the famous balcony appearance. The atmosphere was jubilant, almost carnival-like, with people singing and chanting. Street vendors sold commemorative items, and the smell of food from various stalls mixed with the spring air. This was London at its celebratory best. The city transformed into a giant party in honor of its new king. The procession finally arrived at the palace gates, passing through into the protected courtyard beyond. The sudden relative quiet after the constant noise of the crowds was almost jarring. The Wales family climbed out of their vehicle, the children immediately less formal now that they were away from public view. Louis asked if he could take off his jacket, earning a gentle reminder from his mother that the day was not quite over yet. One more appearance, one more duty, and then they could relax. Inside the palace, there was a brief respite. The family made their way to the rooms designated for their use, a chance to catch their breath before the balcony appearance. George collapsed onto a sofa, his formal uniform suddenly feeling unbearably heavy and hot. Charlotte asked for water, her voice slightly hoarse from the long morning. Louis, showing no signs of slowing down despite the long day, explored the room with interest, looking out windows that offered views of the crowd still gathered outside. William checked his phone briefly, seeing messages from friends and family around the world who had watched the ceremony. The global reach of the event was staggering. Billions of people had tuned in to watch. He showed Catherine a particularly touching message from one of their charities, expressing pride in how the children had represented themselves. These small acknowledgments mattered, reminders that their work and their children's growing participation in royal life had meaning beyond mere ceremony. Catherine took a moment to fix her makeup and hair, knowing the balcony appearance would be photographed extensively. She also checked on each child, ensuring they were comfortable and ready for one final public moment. George needed encouragement, his energy flagging now that the immediate pressure had passed. Charlotte was excited about seeing the crowd from the famous balcony, something she had dreamed about since she was small. Louis just wanted to know if there would be planes, having heard about the planned RAF flypast. The moment approached for them to step onto the balcony. Staff members organized the royal family into the proper order, ensuring the most visually appealing arrangement while respecting protocol and hierarchy. King Charles and Queen Camilla would be central, of course, with the Wales family positioned nearby. This was a carefully choreographed moment, designed to present the royal family as united and accessible, formal yet approachable. Every detail mattered, from positioning to timing to the expressions they wore. As they prepared to step through the doors onto the balcony, William took Catherine's hand briefly. They exchanged a look that communicated volumes without words. Pride in their children, love for each other, awareness of the responsibility they carried, gratitude for getting through this day successfully. Then the doors opened, and the roar of the crowd washed over them, and they stepped forward into history once more, their children at their sides, their family presenting itself to the nation and the world. The balcony of Buckingham Palace offered a view unlike any other in the world. Standing there, looking out over the Mall and the Victoria Memorial, the Wales family could see an ocean of people stretching as far as the eye could see. The crowd filled every available space, packed shoulder to shoulder, their faces turned upward in anticipation. This was a tradition dating back generations, the moment when the royal family presented itself to the people after major occasions, a physical manifestation of the bond between monarchy and nation. King Charles and Queen Camilla stepped forward first, their crowns replaced now with lighter coronets, but their status as newly crowned monarchs evident in their bearing. The crowd erupted, the sound almost physical in its intensity. Cheers, applause, and celebratory shouts created a wave of sound that rolled up to meet them. The king and queen waved, acknowledging the celebration, their faces showing genuine emotion at the overwhelming response. This was what they had worked toward for so long, this moment of acceptance and celebration from the people they had sworn to serve. William and Catherine stepped forward with their children, taking their places on the historic balcony. George stood between his parents, still in his page of honor uniform, looking slightly overwhelmed by the sheer number of people before him. Charlotte positioned herself carefully, remembering the instructions she had been given about how to wave and where to look. Louis, held firmly by his mother's hand, looked out at the crowd with wide eyes, temporarily silenced by the magnitude of what he was seeing. The crowd's reaction to seeing the Wales children was immediate and enthusiastic. People called out to them by name, particularly to young Prince George, who had captured hearts with his serious dedication to his role throughout the ceremony. Charlotte received her share of admiration, the young princess already showing signs of the poise and grace that reminded many of her great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth. And Louis, despite or perhaps because of his earlier fidgeting in the Abbey, had become something of a people's favorite, his unguarded reactions endearing him to millions. Catherine helped Louis wave to the crowd, guiding his small hand in the proper royal wave that looked effortless but was actually quite specific. Palm forward, small movements from the wrist, not too enthusiastic but not too restrained. It was a skill that seemed simple but required practice and awareness. Louis tried his best, though his natural exuberance occasionally broke through the formal gesture. His spontaneous joy was refreshing, a reminder that beneath all the protocol and tradition, these were real people, a real family sharing a real moment of celebration. George stood very straight, aware of the cameras focused on him, aware that his performance today would be analyzed and discussed. The pressure on him was immense for someone so young, yet he handled it with remarkable maturity. He waved to the crowd, his movements measured and appropriate. Catherine watched him closely, ready to offer support if needed, but George seemed to have found his stride. The successful completion of his duties as page of honor had given him confidence, and he was finishing the day strong. Charlotte waved with natural grace, her movements neither too formal nor too casual. She had found a balance that seemed to come naturally to her, an understanding of the role that required no overthinking. She smiled at the crowd, her face reflecting genuine pleasure at being part of this celebration. Catherine felt a surge of pride watching her daughter. Charlotte had the makings of a young woman who would handle royal life with skill and authenticity, maintaining her own identity while fulfilling the expectations placed upon her. The royal family stood together on the balcony, a tableau that would be captured in countless photographs and preserved in national memory. This was the image the public wanted, the visual confirmation of the monarchy's continuity and stability. Behind them, the palace stood solid and unchanging, a symbol of permanence. Before them, the crowd represented the dynamic, evolving nation they served. The balcony moment bridged these two realities, connecting history with the present, tradition with modern celebration. William found his mind wandering briefly to thoughts of the future. One day it would be him and Catherine standing in the center of this balcony, newly crowned. George would be where he stood now, and perhaps George's own children would be where Charlotte and Louis were. The cycle would continue, each generation preparing the next, each carrying forward the traditions while adapting to changing times. The weight of that continuity was both inspiring and daunting. The crowd began to quiet slightly, a change in energy that signaled the approach of the planned flypast. Louis, who had been asking about planes since the morning, suddenly became very alert. He looked up at the sky, searching for the aircraft he had been promised. Catherine smiled at his enthusiasm, grateful for something that could capture his attention so completely. The flypast was a spectacular conclusion to the day's events, and it would give them all something exciting to focus on as the public celebrations drew to a close. The sound reached them before the sight, a growing rumble that built gradually until it filled the air. Then they appeared, aircraft from the Royal Air Force flying in precise formation over the Mall toward Buckingham Palace. The crowd's cheers intensified and Louis jumped slightly with excitement, restrained only by his mother's firm hold. The planes flew overhead in waves, their formations spelling out patterns in the sky, trailing the red, white, and blue of the Union flag. Louis was transfixed, his face turned skyward, his earlier fatigue completely forgotten. This was the moment he had been waiting for, and it lived up to all his expectations. George and Charlotte watched too, impressed by the precision and spectacle of the display. William and Catherine shared a smile over their children's heads, grateful for this moment of pure joy that transcended the formality and pressure of the day. This was what they wanted their children to remember, not just duty and ceremony, but also wonder and celebration. The flypast concluded with the red arrows, their signature red smoke trails creating a dramatic finale. The crowd went wild, the noise reaching new heights as the smoke trails slowly dissipated in the spring breeze. On the balcony, the royal family waved one final time, acknowledging the celebration and the people who had made this day so special. King Charles put his arm around Queen Camilla, a gesture of affection and unity. William did the same with Catherine, while keeping one eye on Louis, who was still watching the sky for more planes. As they prepared to step back from the balcony, returning to the private spaces of the palace, there was a sense of completion. The public portion of the coronation day was ending. They had successfully navigated every challenge, met every expectation, and created memories that would last a lifetime. George had performed his duties flawlessly. Charlotte had shown remarkable composure. Louis had been quintessentially himself, charming in his unpredictability. And William and Catherine had guided their children through it all with patience and pride. The doors closed behind them, and the relative quiet of the palace interior enveloped them once more. Louis immediately asked if they could watch the flypast again, not understanding that it was a one-time event. George tugged at his collar, desperate to get out of his formal uniform. Charlotte asked if they could see photographs of the day, wanting to capture and preserve every detail. Catherine laughed softly, her heart full of love for these three remarkable children who had risen so beautifully to the challenges of the day. They had stepped into history together, and they had done it as a family, supporting each other every step of the way. The private apartments of Buckingham Palace offered a sanctuary from the day's intensity. As the Wales family retreated into these spaces, the difference was immediate and profound. Here, away from cameras and crowds, they could finally be just themselves. George pulled at his page of honor uniform the moment the door closed, desperate to change into comfortable clothes. Charlotte kicked off her formal shoes with an audible sigh of relief. Louis, running on the last fumes of adrenaline, spun in circles until his father caught him and lifted him into the air, both of them laughing. Catherine sank onto a sofa, the physical and emotional exhaustion of the day catching up with her all at once. She had been holding herself together with pure determination, maintaining perfect composure through hours of public scrutiny. Now, in the privacy of their temporary home, she could let down her guard. William sat beside her, taking her hand. They did not need words to communicate what they were feeling. The pride, the relief, the overwhelming love for their children who had handled everything so beautifully. It was a moment of connection that grounded them both. George emerged from the bedroom in jeans and a t-shirt, looking instantly younger and more relaxed. The transformation was remarkable. Without the formal uniform and the weight of his duties, he was simply a 9-year-old boy who had survived a very long and challenging day. He flopped onto the sofa beside his parents, his body language speaking volumes about his exhaustion. Catherine pulled him close, kissing the top of his head. She wanted him to know how proud she was, but she also wanted him to know that he could rest now, that the performance was over. Charlotte appeared next, having changed into a comfortable dress and brushed out her carefully styled hair. She looked tired but content, her face showing the satisfaction of a job well done. She had questions about the day, wanting to process everything she had seen and experienced. Had they noticed when the Archbishop almost dropped the crown? Did they see how Queen Camilla smiled at her during the procession? What did Grandpa say when Father did the homage? Catherine and William answered each question patiently, helping their daughter make sense of the historic events she had witnessed. Louis, now in pajamas despite the relatively early hour, demanded attention. He wanted to talk about the planes, to relive the moment of the flypast over and over. He acted out the planes with his hands, making engine noises as he swooped around the room. His energy seemed limitless, though Catherine knew from experience that when he finally crashed, it would be sudden and complete. For now, she let him burn off the excess excitement, knowing that trying to calm him would be counterproductive. Dinner arrived, brought by palace staff who were themselves winding down from the intensity of hosting such a massive event. The food was simple, comfort meals rather than formal coronation fare. Fish fingers for Louis, pasta for Charlotte, and roast chicken for George. The children ate hungrily, the long day having left them ravenous. Catherine and William picked at their own plates, more focused on ensuring their children ate and stayed hydrated than on their own needs. As they ate, they watched news coverage of the day on a television in the corner. Seeing themselves on screen was always strange, a disconnect between lived experience and public perception. They watched George walking in procession, seeing angles and moments they had not been aware of at the time. They saw Charlotte's perfect behavior and Louis's entertaining fidgeting. The commentators praised the children effusively, noting how well they had represented their generation of royals. William and Catherine exchanged glances, relieved that the public response was so positive. The coverage showed crowds from around the country and the Commonwealth, all celebrating the new king. Street parties, public gatherings, special services in churches and community centers. The coronation had been a unifying moment, bringing people together in celebration. This was the purpose of these grand ceremonies, William reflected. They were not just about crowning a monarch, but about reinforcing the bonds that held communities and nations together. Seeing the widespread celebration made all the pressure and planning feel worthwhile. George fell asleep on the sofa, exhausted beyond his ability to stay awake any longer. William carefully lifted his son, carrying him to the bedroom and tucking him in without fully waking him. George mumbled something in his sleep, his face peaceful now that the day's responsibilities had been fulfilled. William stood looking down at his eldest child, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Pride, certainly, but also a kind of preemptive grief for the normal childhood that George could never fully have. The burden of being a future king started young, and today had been a particularly vivid reminder of that reality. Charlotte was more resistant to sleep, her mind too active to settle easily. She wanted to know more about what would happen next, about the celebrations planned for the following days, about when they would return to their normal routines. Catherine answered her questions while helping her change into pajamas and brush her teeth. There was comfort in these ordinary parental tasks, grounding them in the normal family life that existed alongside their royal duties. Charlotte finally settled into bed with a book, reading a few pages before her eyes began to close. Louis was the last to surrender to sleep, his earlier energy finally depleting. He fell asleep in William's arms, mid-sentence about something to do with planes. William carried him to the room he was sharing with George, laying him gently in bed. Louis curled immediately into his favorite sleeping position, his face relaxing into the perfect peace of childhood sleep. William stood watching both his sons, these remarkable boys who had handled such an extraordinary day with courage and grace. Returning to the main room, William found Catherine standing at the window, looking out over the palace gardens. The grounds were quiet now, the crowds having dispersed to continue their celebrations elsewhere. The spring evening was settling in, long shadows stretching across the carefully manicured lawns. Catherine sensed William's presence and leaned back against him as he wrapped his arms around her. They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other as they had throughout their marriage. They talked quietly about the day, sharing observations and feelings they had been unable to express during the event itself. Catherine admitted how nervous she had been about Louis's behavior, how relieved she was that his antics had been charming rather than disruptive. William confessed how proud he had been watching George fulfill his duties, how emotional the moment of homage with his father had been. They discussed Charlotte's remarkable composure, her evident interest in everything happening around her. These conversations were important, helping them process their own experiences while honoring the significance of what they had all been through. As the evening deepened into night, they reflected on what the coronation meant for their family's future. King Charles's reign had officially begun, changing their own positions and responsibilities. William was now formally the heir to an active monarch, rather than heir to a queen who had reigned for decades. The dynamic was different, the timeline potentially shorter, and their children were growing up, taking on more public roles, being prepared gradually for the lives they would lead. It was all happening so fast, yet according to a timeline that had been centuries in the making. Catherine thought about her own journey to this point, from a girl in Berkshire to Princess of Wales, mother to a future king. The path had been improbable and remarkable, filled with challenges she could never have anticipated. But standing here, in the aftermath of a successful coronation day, with her family safe and sleeping nearby, she felt a sense of purpose and belonging. This was her life. These were her people, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. William held his wife close, grateful for her presence and partnership in navigating the complexities of royal life. Together they had created a family, raised children who were both royal and remarkably normal, managed the balance between duty and personal happiness. Today had been a test of all those efforts, and they had passed with distinction. Their children had shown the world that the next generation of royals would carry forward the best traditions while bringing their own authenticity and charm. As they finally prepared for bed themselves, Catherine checked on each child one last time. All three were deeply asleep, their faces peaceful, the day's excitement finally resolved into rest. She stood in each doorway for a moment, memorizing the sight of them, these precious children who had stepped into history today with courage and grace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight, they could rest in the knowledge that they had done well, that their family had risen to the occasion, and that the future, whatever it might hold, would be faced together.